In 1940s and 50s Plainfield, Wisconsin, Ed Gein was just another quiet, odd neighbor, polite, forgettable, and seemingly harmless. He lived alone on a neglected farm, doing odd jobs and keeping to himself, his awkwardness dismissed as harmless eccentricity. Locals pitied him for his tragic family history, never suspecting the darkness hidden behind his shy smile. Gein's unremarkable presence allowed him to move unnoticed, his true nature masked by the rhythms of small-town life. No one imagined the handyman who fixed their equipment and babysat their children was hiding unspeakable secrets. The illusion of normalcy was so complete that the truth, when revealed, would shatter the town's sense of safety. Sometimes evil wears the face of a quiet neighbor. The story of Ed Gein begins with a man so ordinary no one ever thought to look closer. Ed Gein was born in 1906 to George and Augusta Gein in the heart of rural Wisconsin. The world he entered was one of isolation and hardship, where family was everything, and sometimes that meant everything could go wrong. His father, George, was an alcoholic, often absent and unreliable. But it was Augusta's iron will and religious fanaticism that truly shaped Ed's life. She was a woman of fierce convictions, ruling the household with an unyielding hand and a deep mistrust of the outside world. Augusta isolated her sons, Ed and Henry, on a remote farm far from town. She taught them that the world beyond their fields was filled with evil, and that women, except for herself, were the root of all sin. The boys grew up with few friends, their lives revolving around chores, church, and their mother's stern lessons. Ed, timid and eager to please, became utterly dependent on Augusta. He idolized her, seeing her as the only source of goodness in a corrupt world. Every word she spoke became law, every opinion a commandment. Augusta's control stunted Ed's emotional growth, leaving him unable to form normal relationships or understand the world beyond his mother's teachings. He grew up lonely, withdrawn, and painfully shy, unable to connect with anyone but Augusta. After his father's death, Augusta's grip on Ed tightened even further. The small world he knew shrank, and Ed became more isolated than ever, clinging to his mother for comfort and guidance. When his brother Henry died under suspicious circumstances, Ed was left alone with Augusta. Their bond, already intense, grew even more suffocating. Ed had no one else, no friends, no family, no escape. But soon after, Augusta suffered a stroke and died, leaving Ed devastated and completely alone. The only person he had ever loved, the only voice he had ever trusted, was gone. Her death was the final blow. Ed was left a lost, emotionally stunted man, haunted by the memory of the only person he had ever truly known. The farmhouse, once filled with Augusta's presence, became a tomb of memories and regret. The seeds of his future horrors were sown in this toxic, isolated childhood. The loneliness and confusion that followed Augusta's death would fester in the empty rooms and silent fields. Ed's life after Augusta would be defined by emptiness, confusion, and a desperate longing for the mother he could never replace. He wandered the farm, lost in memories, unable to move forward or let go. The tragedy of Ed Gein began long before his crimes, with a boy who never escaped his mother's shadow, and whose life was shaped by fear, control, and isolation. In the silence of the farmhouse, Ed's mind began to unravel. The boundaries between memory and reality blurred, and the darkness within him grew. The world would soon learn just how deep that unraveling went, and how the seeds of horror planted in childhood would one day bear terrible fruit. After Augusta's death, Ed was left utterly alone. He turned the farmhouse into a shrine, sealing off her rooms and preserving them untouched, as if she might return at any moment. The air inside grew heavy with silence and memories, every object a relic of a life that had vanished. The rest of the house decayed into filth and chaos, mirroring Ed's mental collapse. Dust and debris piled up, and the once lively home became a tomb of neglect, echoing with the absence of Augusta's strict order. Isolated and adrift, Ed became obsessed with anatomy, horror stories, and the idea of resurrecting or even becoming his mother. He pored over medical books and macabre tales, searching for answers in the darkness that surrounded him. His loneliness grew unbearable, and his grief twisted into something monstrous. The boundaries between love, loss, and madness blurred, leaving Ed trapped in a world of his own making. Desperate for connection, Ed began exhuming graves, targeting women who resembled Augusta. The cemetery became his hunting ground, a place where he could search for the impossible, his mother's presence. He brought corpses home, desecrating them in a desperate attempt to reconnect with the female form, without facing the living. Each act was a ritual, a twisted homage to the woman who had shaped his world. These acts were not just grave robbing, but a deranged effort to rebuild the only relationship he'd ever known. Ed's actions blurred the line between devotion and destruction. In his mind, the dead could not judge or reject him. They were silent companions, incapable of the cruelty or disappointment he so deeply feared from the living. Augusta's teachings had become a prison, and Ed's isolation allowed his darkest fantasies to flourish. The farmhouse, once a place of family, became a fortress of secrets and sorrow. The farmhouse became a breeding ground for horrors, all rooted in the shadow of his mother. Ed's world shrank to the size of his grief, and the darkness within him grew ever deeper. Ed's grave robbing escalated as his need for fresher bodies grew, driven by a compulsion he could no longer control. The darkness that had always lingered at the edges of his mind began to take over, pushing him further into the shadows of the night. The line between scavenger and killer blurred, and in 1954, Mary Hogan vanished, Ed's first known murder. Her disappearance sent a ripple of fear through the community, but the true horror of what had happened remained hidden. Her disappearance baffled the town, but no one suspected the quiet handyman who kept mostly to himself. Ed blended in, his unassuming nature masking the darkness within. For years, Ed returned to his solitary routines, his urges cycling between calm and compulsion. The isolation of his rural farmhouse allowed his obsessions to fester, unchecked by the outside world. But in 1957, Bernice Worden disappeared from her hardware store, leaving behind a trail that pointed directly to Gein. The town was shaken, and suspicion finally began to creep in. A simple receipt for antifreeze, sold to Ed, became the clue that unraveled his secret life. Investigators pieced together the evidence, realizing the unimaginable truth. Authorities prepared to search the Gein farm, unaware of the nightmare awaiting them behind those weathered doors. The air was thick with dread as they approached. The quiet man of Plainfield was about to be unmasked, his secrets exposed to a horrified community that had trusted him for years. What they would find would horrify not just Plainfield, but the entire nation. The gruesome discoveries inside the farmhouse would haunt investigators for the rest of their lives. Ed's descent into madness was complete. The predator had replaced the handyman, and the true extent of his crimes would soon be revealed. The town's trust had shielded a monster, allowing evil to flourish in the most unexpected of places. The truth was about to come to light, shattering the illusion of safety that had once defined Plainfield. Evil had been hiding in plain sight, and the world would never look at the quiet countryside the same way again. Investigators entered the Gein farmhouse and found a scene beyond imagination. In the summer kitchen, they discovered Bernice Worden's mutilated body, hung and butchered like game. Inside, the house was a grotesque museum. Bowls made from skulls, furniture upholstered with human skin, masks crafted from faces. They found a woman's suit, skin stitched together in a deranged attempt to become his mother. The scale of depravity stunned even seasoned officers. Years of grave robbing and murder had filled the house with trophies of horror. Ed Gein, once a harmless eccentric, was revealed as a true monster. The discovery shocked the nation and forever changed the town of Plainfield. The House of Horrors became the ultimate symbol of hidden evil in suburbia. Ed Gein's arrest sent shockwaves through Plainfield and beyond. The quiet neighbor was now exposed as a murderer and grave robber. During interrogation, Gein calmly confessed to the murders and dozens of cemetery raids, claiming he was driven by loneliness and a need to be close to his mother. Psychological evaluations found him severely disturbed and unfit for trial. He was committed to a mental institution for life. The public, hungry for justice, struggled to comprehend a man so broken by his upbringing and isolation. The Gein farmhouse became a morbid attraction, but before it could be auctioned, it mysteriously burned down, erasing the physical site, but not the memory. Ed Gein's crimes would haunt the American imagination for generations. The myth of the quiet monster was born. Ed Gein's story changed horror forever. Before Gein, monsters were supernatural. After him, they could be the neighbor next door. His case exposed the terrifying idea that evil could hide behind normalcy, shattering the illusion of suburban safety. The details of his crimes, domineering mothers, human skin masks, desecrated bodies, became new horror tropes. Gein's reality was more frightening than any fiction, inspiring a shift from gothic fantasy to psychological terror. The monster was no longer an outsider, it was one of us. Writers and filmmakers found endless inspiration in the true story of the Plainfield Ghoul. Gein became the prototype for the modern slasher and psychological thriller. His legacy forced us to confront the darkness within ourselves. The age of the human monster had begun. Ed Gein's crimes inspired some of horror's most iconic villains. Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho introduced Norman Bates, a lonely man haunted by his mother, directly echoing Gein. The Texas Chain Saw Massacre's Leatherface, with his skin mask and bone-filled farmhouse, was a gruesome homage. Silence of the Lamb's Buffalo Bill, who skinned women to become his own twisted version of femininity, drew heavily from Gein's pathology. These films brought Gein's horrors to new generations, cementing his influence on the genre. Countless other characters, from American Horror Story to Rob Zombie's films, carry echoes of Gein's madness. He became the blueprint for the psychologically tormented killer. The real-life bogeyman from Wisconsin haunts our screens to this day. Gein's cinematic children ensure his legacy endures. Ed Gein died in 1984, buried in an unmarked grave beside his mother and brother. Plainfield tries to forget, but his shadow lingers, a dark chapter etched into its history. Gein is now more myth than man, the ultimate wolf in sheep's clothing. His crimes fascinate and horrify because they defy simple explanation. Driven by isolation, grief, and obsession, he became a symbol of hidden evil. The archetypes he inspired, Norman Bates, Leatherface, Buffalo Bill, are more famous than Gein himself, but all trace back to his farmhouse. Every story of a killer with a maternal fixation or a taste for human trophies walks the path Gein blazed. He is the ghostwriter of our darkest nightmares. Ed Gein's story endures because it reveals the monsters within us, not just outside. The quiet man from Plainfield remains the father of modern horror, his legacy of fear as potent now as ever.